What if Harry never truly wanted to leave? What if the entire Megxit saga wasn't the story of a rebellious prince breaking free, but of a man carefully, quietly, and relentlessly pressured into walking away from everything he had ever known? Imagine that for a moment. Because according to Prince William, now at 43, that's exactly the story behind the headlines. From the outside, it looked so clean. A polished announcement. A smiling couple in glossy portraits. Harry and Meghan declaring they were stepping back, embracing independence, taking control of their lives. The press packaged it neatly, a dramatic royal exit, a couple choosing freedom over duty. But was that really the truth? Or was it a mask, a stage-managed illusion hiding the darker reality of emotional manipulation, family tension, and choices Harry may never have fully made for himself? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. This isn't just about two brothers anymore. This is about power, about loyalty, about the weight of being born into a world where nothing you decide is truly your own. And that's why this revelation from William matters now more than ever. Because when the heir to the throne confirms the whispers that Harry was pressured into leaving, it reshapes the entire narrative we've been told. Think about the last time you made a big decision in your life. Maybe it was a career move, maybe it was walking away from a relationship. You told yourself it was your choice. But deep down, were you sure? Or was someone nudging you, whispering doubts into your ear, making you feel like leaving was the only option, even when part of you wanted to stay? If you've ever felt that, then you understand exactly what this story is about. Harry's journey out of the royal family wasn't smooth. It wasn't glamorous. Behind the cameras, behind the palace walls, there were arguments, long nights, tears, and whispered doubts. Insiders say Harry was torn between his love for Meghan and his loyalty to his family. Torn between protecting his wife from a relentless press and preserving the legacy his mother died trying to uphold. Torn between his role as a prince and his need to be just a man. That kind of tearing doesn't happen overnight. It's a slow erosion of self, of certainty, of security. And William saw it. He saw it happening. He watched his brother's world shrink, his circle narrow, his trust fracture. He saw Harry pulled further away from the family that raised him, isolated by choices that didn't quite look like his own. And when William finally spoke about it, his words didn't just confirm suspicions. They exposed the deepest fear the monarchy has tried to bury, that Harry's departure wasn't freedom. It was exile disguised as choice. But why now? Why, at 43, has William allowed even the faintest confirmation to escape? Timing is everything in the royal family. Silence is their armor. So when William hints, even subtly, that Harry never wanted to leave, you can bet it's not accidental. Is it guilt, gnawing away at him after years of watching his brother stumble? Is it strategy, carefully timed to protect the crown as Charles's reign wavers under pressure? Or is it something more personal, a final attempt to reclaim the truth before history cements the official version forever? The stakes are enormous. Because this isn't just a family squabble, it's about the survival of the monarchy itself. If Harry left of his own accord, the institution looks strong. If he was manipulated out, the cracks are gaping. And William, the man who will one day sit on the throne, knows the difference matters. It matters for his reign, for his legacy, for the trust of the people who will one day call him king. Picture Harry at that moment. Picture the man who once laughed at polo matches beside his brother, now sitting across the ocean, burdened by deals, commitments, and the weight of telling his truth in documentaries and memoirs. A man who speaks about freedom, but whose eyes, when you really look, betray a loneliness he can't quite disguise. Isn't it strange that for all the talk of independence, Harry often looks anything but free? And then, layer Meghan into this. Was she Harry's savior, rescuing him from a family that never protected his mother and would never protect his wife? Or was she the architect of the exit, whispering that he could be more, do more, earn more, if only he walked away? This is the contradiction that fuels the debate, the contradiction that William's quiet words seem to pierce through. Because if Harry never wanted to leave, then Meghan's influence becomes impossible to ignore. Ask yourself, how many of us have been in relationships where love blurred the lines between choice and pressure? Where standing by someone you adored meant surrendering pieces of yourself you never thought you'd give up? For Harry, those pieces included his crown, his country, and the family that defined him. Did he surrender them willingly? Or was he convinced he had no other option? And here's where the story becomes almost unbearable in its irony. Diana raised her boys to protect one another, to always look out for each other against the world that treated her so cruelly. But in the end, William became the heir and Harry became the spare, and their bond cracked under the very weight Diana feared. William rose into his role, while Harry, trapped between love and duty, was pulled out of the family entirely. Now, with William confirming the whispers that Harry never wanted to leave, the picture shifts completely. It's no longer the story of a rebel prince abandoning tradition. It's the story of a man pulled out by subtle manipulation, hidden pressures, and family silence that left him no path but one he never would have chosen on his own. And yet, this is only the beginning, because William's words raise a new and chilling question. If Harry never wanted to leave, what truly forced him out? Who applied the pressure? How was it done? And why did no one stop it? But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The fairy tale of Diana's boys. That's how the world once saw them. Two princes walking behind their mother's coffin, united in grief, bound by a promise to carry her legacy. William and Harry, brothers in arms against the relentless gaze of the world. But how quickly a fairy tale can fracture. Because beneath the photographs, the handshakes, the smiles at events, the bond between the brothers was under attack long before Harry walked away. And it was William who saw it unravel, powerless to stop it. Ask yourself this. How does a bond forged in tragedy, in a shared loss that shook the world, begin to break apart? Is it distance? Duty? Or is it something far more deliberate? Someone working quietly to pry one brother from the other, until even blood ties begin to snap? Let's go back to the beginning. Harry was always the freer spirit, the spare. William had a destiny, to be king. Harry had space, or at least the illusion of it. He was the one who could laugh louder, play harder, get away with being mischievous. William was the golden heir, Harry the fiery younger brother. And yet, for all their differences, Diana raised them to be equals in one essential way. They would always have each other. When the world turned cruel, when the press swarmed, when the monarchy demanded perfection, they would lean on one another. For years, that's how it was. William, steady and serious. Harry, wild and reckless. But always, they circled back to one another. At Sandhurst, on tours, in the chaos of paparazzi storms, they had each other's backs. The image of two young men bonded in loss wasn't just a picture for magazines. It was the truth. Or at least, it was once. But every bond has breaking points. As William stepped deeper into his royal destiny, marrying Kate, starting a family, shaping himself into the next king, Harry felt the gap widen. The press adored the Cambridges, while Harry's every move was dissected and spun. Still, even then, the brothers managed to laugh together, to trade jokes, to lean on the unspoken understanding that they were all each other had. Then Meghan arrived. At first, it seemed perfect. Harry had finally found someone who adored him, who gave him a sense of purpose beyond palace walls. William welcomed her politely, publicly, perhaps even warmly. But behind closed doors, sources whisper that William was cautious, maybe even suspicious. He saw how fast things were moving. He questioned Harry's judgment. And for Harry, already sensitive to being overshadowed, it was a blow. Because here's the contradiction. William wanted to protect his brother, but his attempts to warn him may have driven them further apart. What sounds like caution from one brother can feel like judgment to another. And judgment, when you're in love and under siege from the press, feels like betrayal. The divide began small. A cold word here, a clipped response there. But like cracks in glass, once they appear, they spread. Insiders say Harry grew defensive, convinced William wasn't supporting him. William, meanwhile, grew frustrated, watching his brother drift into decisions that seemed rash, emotional, dangerous. Neither brother could bridge the gap. Neither could find the language to say, "I'm scared for you, because I love you." The tragedy? That was Diana's greatest fear, that her sons would be swallowed by the very institution that destroyed her, turned against one another, and left alone in the machine of monarchy. And slowly, inexorably, that's exactly what happened. Still, even as tensions grew, William noticed something darker. Harry wasn't just distancing himself from the institution. He was distancing himself from William too. Late-night calls turned fewer. Invitations declined. Conversations that once ran deep now skimmed the surface. And when they did meet, Meghan was always there, subtly shifting the dynamics, subtly pulling Harry's focus. Was this natural for a marriage, or was it something else? Ask yourself, how do you know when someone close to you is being pulled away? Is it the way they start defending things they never cared about before? Is it the way they stop calling as often, stop confiding in you, stop trusting you with the details of their life? William knew those signs, and he saw them in Harry. The press spun the brothers as simply growing apart. Different paths, natural distance. But William felt the truth. This wasn't natural. This was engineered. One chilling detail stands out. An insider recalls that Harry, once the joker in the family, started speaking in the language of grievance. Words he never used before, words about oppression, about being trapped, about being silenced, crept into his conversations. And William knew. Those weren't Harry's words. Those were words being fed to him. Think about that. A brother who once laughed at his role now described it as imprisonment. A prince who once embraced duty now saw it as shackles. That kind of shift doesn't happen overnight. It happens when someone is whispering in your ear, reminding you of every slight, every wound, every reason to leave. And that's what tore at William most. He wasn't just losing his brother to distance. He was losing him to influence. Picture it. William, heir to the throne, standing in palace corridors steeped in history, realizing that the brother he swore to protect was slipping through his fingers. He tried to intervene. He tried to reach out. But Harry, already cornered, already defensive, pushed back harder. Every attempt to protect him sounded like an attempt to control him. Every warning sounded like disapproval. And so, the bond broke. This wasn't just the natural drift of adulthood. It was fracture. And it left William watching, helpless, as Harry moved closer to the exit door of the royal family. But here's the haunting part. Even as the brothers clashed, William carried one growing suspicion. Harry wasn't leaving because he wanted to. He was leaving because he felt he had no choice. And that realization would haunt William for years. Until, finally, at 43, he confirmed what so many had whispered all along. But the storm that erupted behind palace walls, the arguments, the confrontations, the explosive moments no camera ever caught, would reveal just how far this fracture had already gone. And when those truths surface, they paint a picture even darker than the world imagined. Because what came next would make the rift between the brothers look like only the beginning. We all remember the headlines. The world woke up one January morning in 2020 to the news that Prince Harry and Meghan Markle were stepping back from royal duties. It was presented as calm, polished, almost surgical, a statement crafted with precision. We intend to carve out a progressive new role within this institution. They spoke of balancing their time between North America and the UK, of financial independence, of freedom. The press branded it Megxit, a clever nickname that sounded more like a fashion trend than a seismic rupture in the monarchy. But here's the question. Was that statement the truth, or was it the story they wanted us to believe? Because insiders, whispers, and now Prince William's own confirmation suggests something very different. They suggest that this Sussex exit wasn't Harry's grand idea at all, but a carefully managed illusion. That Harry wasn't a man grabbing freedom with both hands, but one being pushed, nudged, manipulated, until he finally signed his own walking papers. Think about how that announcement looked on the surface. Smiling photographs, perfectly crafted Instagram posts. Harry and Meghan painted themselves as trailblazers, as modern royals rewriting history. The media, for once, wasn't entirely critical. Some praised their boldness, their courage to break with tradition. But beneath the gloss, cracks were already visible. And those cracks, according to William and other insiders, reveal the truth. Harry didn't stride out of the palace with fire in his eyes. He hesitated. He wavered. He questioned. He reportedly told close friends he wasn't sure if it was the right step. He knew the weight of leaving. He knew what it meant to sever ties with the only life he'd ever known. But once the wheels were in motion, once the narrative had been launched, there was no turning back. Ask yourself this. How many times have you committed to something because someone close to you insisted it was the right move, only to feel, deep down, that you weren't ready? That's the space Harry lived in. Behind palace walls, William and Charles were stunned by the sudden announcement. Reports claimed the Queen herself was blindsided, learning about the decision at nearly the same moment the rest of the world did. The idea that Harry had carefully consulted his family? Fiction. In reality, this was a shock offensive, crafted and executed without the institution's blessing. And the one person pushing Harry to make it public, according to whispers? Meghan. But why the rush? Why the need to announce without the Queen's sign-off? Because once it was out, once the world saw it, the monarchy couldn't shove the toothpaste back in the tube. It locked Harry into the decision. He couldn't walk it back without humiliation. He was trapped, by his own words, but perhaps not his own will. Here's the contradiction that reveals the deeper truth. The official story was about freedom, yet Harry's actions afterwards screamed dependency. Financial independence? Within months, they signed multi-million-dollar deals with Netflix and Spotify. Privacy? They launched one of the most public docuseries in history. Stepping back from the spotlight, they staged paparazzi-style appearances and high-profile interviews. Independence became a new cage, made not of palace protocol, but of contracts, publicity, and relentless exposure. That doesn't look like freedom. That looks like someone searching for validation. And William saw it. He knew his brother wasn't chasing independence. He was running from pressure, from manipulation, from a voice telling him he couldn't survive inside the family. And William, even as heir to the throne, couldn't cut through that fog. One chilling detail slipped through in those early months. A source close to the palace revealed that Harry told a friend he felt he had no choice. Not "I wanted this," not "I planned this," but "I had no choice." Those words cut to the heart of William's later confirmation. Think about that phrase in your own life. I had no choice. It's not the language of freedom. It's the language of surrender. It's the language of someone cornered into believing one path is possible, even when their heart longs for another. Now picture the Queen's face as she read the statement. A monarch who had weathered wars, scandals, and abdications, now confronted with her grandson walking away, not with dignity, not with unity, but with division and chaos. Imagine Charles, already struggling to prepare for his reign, realizing one son had detonated a bomb under the institution. And William, standing at the center of it all, realizing his worst fears had come true. Harry wasn't leaving because he was free. He was leaving because he was persuaded, pressured, convinced. And once the announcement was made, once the world was watching, he couldn't undo it. And here's the cruelest irony. The statement promised balance. It promised a life half in, half out. But the monarchy doesn't allow half measures. You're either in, or you're out. That's the unspoken rule of the firm. Harry and Meghan claimed they could bend the system, rewrite the rules. But the Queen knew better. She drew the line. And once she did, Harry was fully out. Cut off. Exiled. Not by choice, but by the trap of the very announcement meant to liberate him. That's the difference between the public story and the private reality. Publicly, Harry chose. Privately, Harry was cornered. Publicly, the Sussexes were rebels. Privately, Harry was a man torn apart, unsure, uneasy, but locked into a path from which he couldn't turn back. And William? He watched. He knew. He carried the knowledge that his brother didn't stride away with pride. He stumbled out, pushed by forces he couldn't resist. But what came after the announcement? The strategies used to corner Harry further, to isolate him from every lifeline he had left, would reveal just how far this manipulation went. And once you see how Harry was boxed in, you'll understand why William finally spoke the truth. Because what followed wasn't freedom. It was entrapment disguised as liberation. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Isolation. It's one of the oldest tactics in the book. If you want to change someone's mind, if you want to reshape their choices, you don't have to shout, you don't have to fight. You just have to make sure they feel completely alone. Cut off their lifelines. Remove the voices that steady them. Leave only your own influence ringing in their ears. And that, according to those closest to the story, is exactly what happened to Prince Harry. Now, ask yourself this. How does a man born into one of the largest families on earth, surrounded by staff, institutions, traditions, end up feeling like he has nobody? How do you isolate a prince? It started slowly. Subtle shifts, small fractures. Friends from his military days began to fade into the background. Invitations to old hunting trips, rugby meetups, boys' weekends, they dwindled. Some of that could be explained by marriage, by moving into a new chapter of life. But people who knew Harry swear this was different. This wasn't just natural distance. This was deliberate. Consider this. Before Meghan, Harry was famously social, always surrounded by friends, always at ease in large groups. But after the wedding, insiders say his circle narrowed dramatically. He stopped calling old mates. He skipped traditions he once loved. Even his bond with William, once his strongest anchor, was fraying under the weight of arguments and mistrust. And in place of all those voices, one voice grew louder. Meghan's. Now, this isn't unusual in relationships. Anyone who's ever fallen deeply in love knows how the world seems to shrink to just two people. But in Harry's case, the consequences were bigger. Because for the first time in his life, the loudest voice wasn't his brother's, wasn't his grandmother's, wasn't even his father's, it was Meghan's. The palace courtiers noticed it too. Staff who once had easy access to Harry reported that he became harder to reach. His schedule was tightly controlled. Meetings were filtered. Calls went unanswered. Where once he had moved fluidly through the palace, chatting with staff and family alike, now there were barriers. Walls. Even physical separation. He and Meghan choosing Frogmore Cottage, away from the core of palace life, instead of remaining close to William and Kate. But the most chilling sign of isolation came in the way Harry's language began to change. Friends recall that he started describing himself as trapped. Not frustrated. Not burdened. Trapped. A word heavy with helplessness, with victimhood. It was the kind of word Diana herself had once used to describe life inside the palace. And suddenly, Harry was using it too. Who was feeding him that sense of entrapment. Because here's the contradiction. Harry had once embraced his royal role. He was proud to serve in the military. He threw himself into the Invictus Games. He relished the chance to connect with ordinary people on tours. He was the people's prince, unpolished, approachable, relatable. And yet, within a few short years, he came to see it all as a prison. That kind of 180-degree shift doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from constant reinforcement, from someone reminding you of every insult, every slight, every reason to resent the institution. And so Harry, the joker, the soldier, the brother who once laughed his way through engagements, became Harry the bitter, the wounded, the isolated. Think about this in your own life. Have you ever had a friend or loved one suddenly pull away, start using language that doesn't sound like them anymore? Did you feel like they were becoming someone else? That's what William saw in Harry. That's what frightened him. Insiders claim William tried to reach out, tried to break through the wall. But every attempt made things worse. He urged Harry to slow down with Meghan. Harry took it as criticism. He reminded Harry of his duty. Harry heard it as control. He asked questions about Meghan's motives. Harry interpreted it as disrespect. It's the perfect storm of isolation. Take someone already grieving the loss of his mother, already wary of the press, already defensive about being the spare, and then cut off the voices that steady him, replacing them with a single voice feeding his fears. And the palace played a role too. Their silence didn't help. When Meghan complained about the press, when Harry begged for stronger protection, the institution's stiff refusal only deepened the couple's sense of being abandoned. That silence became proof that the firm didn't care, proof that they were alone, proof that leaving was the only option. Here's the irony. By refusing to bend, the palace made it easier for Meghan's narrative to stick. Harry's anger at the institution became self-fulfilling. Every ignored plea reinforced the idea that he and Meghan had only each other. And that isolation grew tighter. But it wasn't just about the institution. Harry's own friendships were unraveling. One close army friend reportedly said, "He's changed. He doesn't come around anymore. It's like he doesn't need us." Was that Harry's choice? Or was it a carefully managed distancing, ensuring no one could counter the narrative he was being fed? And then there was William. For all their clashes, for all their differences, William remained Harry's most important anchor. But that anchor was being lifted. Meghan reportedly complained about William's attitude. The brothers' arguments grew more heated. Even the infamous story of William warning Harry to take his time in the relationship was twisted into a wedge. What should have been brotherly advice became a permanent rift. And so Harry found himself in a position that was almost unthinkable just a few years earlier. Estranged from his brother, distant from his old friends, disconnected from the institution, leaning on Meghan as his only ally. one voice, one perspective, one constant reinforcement. This is the anatomy of isolation. It doesn't look like a cage at first. It looks like love. It looks like loyalty. It looks like us against the world. But slowly, it strips away every other option until the only path left is the one being handed to you. And when William saw his brother slipping further into this bubble, his heart sank. Because he realized Harry wasn't making decisions as the Harry he had always known. He was making decisions as a man cut off from every stabilizing force in his life. Isolation had done its work. But what William didn't realize, what none of them realized, was that the storm was about to break into the open. Because once Harry's isolation was complete, once he had been emotionally cornered, the next stage was confrontation. And when those confrontations erupted inside the palace walls, the public would never see the true fury that unfolded. But insiders did. And their accounts reveal the moment everything truly snapped. Because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Influence or manipulation? That's the question that sits at the heart of this entire saga. Was Meghan Markle the woman who saved Prince Harry from a life of suffocating tradition, or was she the one who slowly and deliberately pulled him away from the family, the duty, and even the brother who once defined his identity? Depending on who you ask, she is either hero or villain, liberator or strategist. But when William quietly confirmed that Harry never truly wanted to leave, the shadow of Meghan's influence became impossible to ignore. Let's confront the contradiction right away. Meghan entered the royal family with energy, charisma, and ambition. She was a woman who had built a career on her own terms, who understood media, who thrived in the spotlight. To Harry, bruised by years of tabloid ridicule and defined by the label of the spare, she was intoxicating. Here was someone who seemed to understand him, who gave him a new story about himself, who whispered that he could be more than just the backup prince. But here's the danger. When someone offers you a new identity, are they empowering you, or are they rewriting you in their image? Think about how fast it all happened. A whirlwind romance. An engagement announced after just over a year of dating. A wedding broadcast to the world. Harry once described Meghan as the missing piece of his life. That kind of intensity is rare and intoxicating, but it also leaves someone vulnerable. Especially someone like Harry, who had lost his mother young, who carried deep scars of abandonment, who craved unconditional loyalty. Meghan gave him that loyalty, or at least, that's what it looked like. But it came at a cost. Friends noticed Harry's worldview shifting. He began to echo Meghan's frustrations with the press, frustrations with the palace, frustrations with William and Kate. Meghan's grievances became Harry's. Her battles became his. That's love, some would say. But others saw something different. Influence crossing into manipulation. Consider this. Meghan came into the firm with no illusions. She wasn't naive about the press, about publicity, about branding. She knew exactly how narratives are shaped, how headlines are written, how sympathy is won. She had played the game in Hollywood. She knew its rules. And now she was teaching those rules to Harry, a man raised in a world where silence and stoicism were the only tools given to him. Suddenly, he had a new playbook, a new way of seeing himself. And that's where William's alarm bells rang. Because William, steady, cautious, rooted in tradition, saw his brother being remade. He saw Harry, once so committed to his royal role, begin to describe it as suffocating. He saw Harry, once the mischievous but loyal son, begin to question whether the institution ever truly cared for him. He saw Harry, once inseparable from his brother, start pulling away with words and grievances that didn't sound like his own. This isn't to say Meghan didn't have legitimate reasons to feel isolated herself. The press was brutal. The tabloids dissected her every move, her family drama, her clothes, her behavior. She faced a storm that was undeniably cruel. And Harry, protective to a fault, couldn't bear to see his wife suffer. His instinct was to shield her, to side with her, to fight for her. But here's the twist. That very loyalty became the lever. The more Harry fought for Meghan, the more distant he grew from his family. The more he defended her, the more he alienated William. The cycle fed itself, until Harry was standing almost entirely on one side, hers. Ask yourself this. Where is the line between protecting someone you love and surrendering yourself entirely to their narrative? Have you ever been so determined to stand by someone that you gave up your own perspective, your own connections, your own anchors. That's the space Harry found himself in. And Meghan knew how to frame it. Insiders claim she used language Harry couldn't resist. It's us against the world. They'll never protect you, but I will. They'll never love me, but I love you. Those phrases are powerful. They trigger loyalty, sacrifice, and the willingness to burn bridges. To Harry, they were irresistible. To William, they were dangerous. Because what William saw wasn't just love, it was dependency. Look at the decisions Harry made under Meghan's influence. Leaving royal duty, moving continents, signing contracts that tethered them to Hollywood, exposing family secrets in interviews. These weren't the choices of a man weighing his options carefully. These were the leaps of someone swept along by a force greater than his own instincts. And Meghan? She thrived in this new environment. While Harry struggled with identity, with loneliness, with anger, Meghan became the polished face of the Sussex brand. Appearances, interviews, speeches, she took to it seamlessly. For her, life outside the palace was opportunity. For Harry, it was dislocation. Do you see the difference? That difference is exactly what William hinted at when he confirmed that Harry never truly wanted to leave. Because if Harry didn't want to go, then whose dream was it? Whose vision? Whose plan? But here's the irony that makes the story sting. Meghan may have believed she was saving Harry, saving him from a system that had crushed his mother, from a press that never let him breathe, from a family that didn't protect him. In her eyes, she may have been the liberator. But in William's eyes, and perhaps in Harry's quietest, loneliest moments, her influence may have crossed a line. What began as protection ended as persuasion. What began as love ended as exile. And that's why this chapter is so important. Because whether you see Meghan as a hero or as a manipulator, one fact now seems undeniable. Her influence was the deciding factor in Harry's exit. But what William revealed goes deeper still. Because behind the headlines, behind the polished statements, behind the smiles, there were confrontations. Explosive, behind-the-scenes clashes that shook the palace walls. Confrontations that showed just how bitter, how raw, how personal this struggle became. And those battles would prove that Harry wasn't just drifting away. He was being torn away. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Imagine being the older brother. You've carried the weight of expectation your entire life. You know the throne will be yours one day, whether you want it or not. You've shaped yourself into a man of duty, of restraint, of patience. And through it all, you've watched your younger brother stumble, rebel, laugh, and then rise again. You've always been his protector, his shadow, his anchor. Now imagine standing by, powerless, as that brother drifts further and further away, pulled by forces you can't control, making choices you know he doesn't truly want to make. That's where William found himself. William's role in this drama wasn't loud. It wasn't explosive. It wasn't full of dramatic statements to the press. His role was quiet, observing, processing, waiting. And those silent observations, his private understanding of what was really happening, are what make his eventual confirmation so devastating. Because William didn't just guess Harry was pressured into leaving. He saw it. Think back to the early days of Meghan's arrival. The press was enchanted, calling the fab for the future of the monarchy. William, Kate, Harry, Meghan. Smiles at charity events. Double dates at official functions. The promise of a new generation modernizing the firm. But behind the camera flashes, William's eyes were sharper. He noticed how Harry deferred more and more to Meghan. How decisions about engagements, about schedules, about appearances were suddenly filtered through her. William didn't see an equal partnership. He saw dependency. And William worried. Not because he didn't want Harry happy. Not because he resented Meghan. But because he knew what it meant to be consumed by the machine of monarchy. He knew how dangerous it was to rely too heavily on one person's counsel, to cut yourself off from balancing voices. He had watched their mother, Diana, be isolated by courtiers and whispers. He had seen how that isolation consumed her. And now, painfully, he saw the same pattern repeating with his brother. Ask yourself, how would you feel if you recognized a cycle repeating itself in your own family? You'd want to scream. You'd want to pull your brother aside and shake him. And William tried. Reports suggest he pulled Harry aside in those early months and told him to take it slow, to think carefully, to consider whether Meghan was truly ready for the storm of royal life. It wasn't meant as criticism. It wasn't meant as rejection. It was meant as protection. But Harry didn't hear it that way. He heard judgment. He heard doubt. He heard a lack of loyalty. And in that moment, Meghan's voice became louder than William's. From there, William could only observe as the dynamic hardened. Harry stopped sharing his doubts with him. He stopped seeking his counsel. When decisions were made, William heard about them secondhand, or worse, from the press. Imagine the sting of learning about your brother's plans not from his lips, but from a public statement. Still, William watched. He noticed the change in Harry's language. Words like trapped and suffocated entering his vocabulary. He noticed the change in Harry's demeanor, more tense, more defensive, less like the carefree brother he once knew. He noticed the way Harry's eyes darted in interviews, searching for Meghan's approval before answering. These weren't the signs of a man confidently choosing a new path. These were the signs of a man being shepherded down one. And yet, William said little. Why? Because silence is the royal weapon. It is the only shield they've ever known. And William, unlike Harry, had been trained to wield it perfectly. He learned from the Queen, from Charles, from decades of palace courtiers. You don't shout. You don't cry. You don't fight in public. You watch. You listen. You bide your time. That's how the monarchy survives. But that silence came at a cost. For Harry, William's silence felt like betrayal. He wanted his brother to defend him, to shield Meghan from the press, to rage against the machine on his behalf. But William didn't. Not publicly. Not loudly. And so Harry interpreted that silence as abandonment. He didn't realize that behind the mask, William was quietly cataloging every change, every manipulation, every sign that Harry wasn't leaving because he wanted to, but because he felt he had no choice. Picture William in those private family meetings. Charles frustrated, the Queen exasperated, courtiers scrambling. Everyone looking at William as the heir, as the steady one, as the man who would hold the family together. And all the while, William's eyes kept returning to his brother, watching, measuring, realizing with a growing heaviness that the man sitting across the table wasn't truly free. This is the agony of William's role. He couldn't intervene without making things worse. He couldn't stay silent without looking complicit. He couldn't stop the tide without drowning in it himself. And so he did the only thing he could. He watched. He observed. He remembered. Until, finally, at 43, he confirmed what he had known all along. But here's where the story turns darker. Because William's silent observations weren't the end. They were the prelude. What followed were not quiet warnings, not subtle hints, but explosive confrontations. Arguments that shook the palace walls. Rows that left relationships shattered. Because if William's silence spoke volumes, his voice, when he finally raised it, would tear the family apart. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The public never saw it. The glossy photographs from balcony appearances, the carefully staged smiles at Commonwealth services, the polite handshakes with dignitaries, those were the images the world consumed. But behind the gilded palace doors, far from the cameras and the choreographed traditions, the truth was very different. There were shouting matches, doors slammed, tears shed, tensions that had simmered for months finally boiled over. And it was in those moments, those explosive confrontations behind palace walls, that the fracture between William and Harry deepened into something almost irreparable. Ask yourself this. How much of your family conflict would you survive if it happened under the harshest spotlight on earth? If every disagreement wasn't just personal, but also political, historical, constitutional? That was the trap Harry and William found themselves in. Every argument between brothers wasn't just a row. It was a battle for the soul of the monarchy. The first major confrontation, according to whispers from those who were there, was sparked by William's attempt to reason with Harry. William had seen his brother becoming increasingly isolated, increasingly defensive, increasingly influenced by Meghan. He wanted to pull Harry back, to remind him of his duty, his legacy, the bond they once shared. But the way he approached it was blunt, direct, almost paternal. William, the heir, talking to Harry, the spare. And Harry, raw with defensiveness, heard it as judgment. You're rushing this. You're not thinking clearly. That, reportedly, was the tone of William's warning. And Harry exploded. He accused William of snobbery, of disrespect toward Meghan, of refusing to see the truth of what they were facing. Imagine it. Two brothers who had once clung to each other in grief, now standing in palace corridors, voices raised, each convinced the other had betrayed him. Staff heard the shouting. Courtiers whispered about a blazing row, but the details were carefully contained. The official story? Normal family disagreements. The truth? It was war. And Meghan was often at the center of these confrontations. She and William reportedly clashed directly, sometimes in words, sometimes in silence that spoke louder than anything. William questioned her influence. Meghan questioned his treatment of Harry. Each saw themselves as protector. Each saw the other as threat. Harry, caught between them, grew more volatile, more desperate, more convinced that his only choice was to side with Meghan. One insider recalls a particularly heated argument just months before the Sussex exit became public. William, frustrated beyond measure, accused Meghan of manipulating Harry, of isolating him from his family. Meghan, furious, shot back that the family had done nothing to protect her or Harry from the relentless press. Harry sided with Meghan instantly, and that was the moment William knew. The brother he had once guided, once protected, was no longer listening. He was gone. Think about the emotions boiling in that room. William, red with frustration, desperate to save his brother from what he saw as ruin. Harry, defensive, wounded, determined to prove his loyalty to his wife. Meghan, fiery, convinced she was fighting for survival. And around them, palace walls that had seen centuries of royal secrets, absorbing yet another family implosion. These arguments weren't just about personal slights. They were about identity, about the monarchy itself. William saw Harry's departure as a threat to the institution, a betrayal of their grandmother, a rejection of everything Diana had hoped they would carry forward. Harry saw William's resistance as coldness, as proof that even his own brother wouldn't put love before duty. The irony? Both thought they were protecting family. Both thought they were fighting for what was right. And yet, neither could bridge the chasm. The Queen knew about these confrontations. Charles too. But true to form, they sought to contain, to silence, to smooth things over with vague reassurances. Time will heal. Brothers fight. But William knew this was different. He saw the manipulation, the isolation, the pressure, and every row only confirmed it. Every word Harry spoke sounded less like his own and more like an echo of someone else. Ask yourself, how would you feel hearing your brother use phrases you know don't belong to him? Seeing his anger fueled not by his own instincts, but by words that seemed planted? William wasn't just angry. He was heartbroken. He was watching Harry slip away in real time, and there was nothing he could do. And the rows didn't stop with words. They bled into body language at public events. Stiff smiles, awkward glances, a visible frost between William and Harry at engagements where once they had shared easy laughter. The cameras caught it, but the world didn't yet know the depth of what they were seeing. Those cold exchanges weren't staged. They were the fallout of nights spent in shouting matches, of accusations hurled in private, of wounds that never healed. Still, William held his tongue publicly. He had to. He was the heir. He couldn't afford to show the world how broken the brothers truly were. But in private, those confrontations scarred him. They hardened him. And when he finally spoke years later, confirming that Harry never wanted to leave, it wasn't just a political calculation. It was the quiet voice of a brother who had lived through those battles and knew the truth. But those palace rows were only part of the story. Because outside the gilded gates, another machine was at work. A machine just as powerful, just as manipulative, just as relentless. The media. And the way the press spun these private wars only tightened the grip around Harry, deepening his isolation and feeding the cycle. And once the media machine fully engaged, the line between truth and spin blurred beyond recognition. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Whose truth did we ever really hear? Was it Harry's truth? William's truth? Meghan's truth? Or was it the version the media machine wanted us to consume, shaped, packaged, and sold to millions with a headline and a clickbait tag? Because if the private rows inside the palace fractured the brothers, it was the media storm outside that turned cracks into canyons. Think about it. The press has always been the third player in the royal game. Sometimes ally, sometimes executioner. They crowned Diana the people's princess, then hounded her until the night she died in a Paris tunnel. They adored Kate Middleton as the perfect future queen, then dissected her family's every move. And when Meghan Markle entered the stage, the media saw opportunity, a new narrative, a new cash cow, a new character to either praise or destroy, depending on what sold best. But here's the contradiction. On the surface, the media portrayed Harry and Meghan as rebels, breaking free from the outdated monarchy. They were painted as bold, independent, rewriting the rulebook. But behind that story, the same outlets were fueling Meghan's grievances, feeding Harry's paranoia, and painting William as cold and controlling. Each article, each headline, added fuel to the fire already burning between the brothers. Ask yourself, how much of your family conflict would survive being printed in a national newspaper? What if every argument you ever had with a sibling was not only reported but exaggerated, twisted, spun into something unrecognizable? That was Harry and William's reality. Let's take one example. When William allegedly warned Harry to slow down in his relationship with Meghan, the press ran with it. The story became, William disrespects Meghan. William questions Meghan's background. The narrative was clear. William the snob, Harry the protective husband, Meghan the misunderstood outsider. Was that the full truth? Insiders insist no. William's warning was about timing, not character. But the media doesn't sell nuance, it sells conflict. And Harry, reading those headlines, saw only confirmation that William wasn't on his side. The machine did its work. And then there was silence. The palace's official policy. Never complain, never explain. It had worked for the Queen for decades. But in Harry's world, silence wasn't strength, it was abandonment. Every time the palace refused to publicly defend Meghan, every time they ignored a headline he saw as racist or unfair, Harry felt betrayed. Meghan too. That silence became another form of isolation, another wedge driving Harry further away. William, trained in the same tradition, stayed silent as well. He had to. His role demanded it. But Harry interpreted that silence not as duty, but as proof his brother didn't care. And the press? They thrived on that. William cold and unfeeling. Harry isolated. Meghan under siege. Each headline drove the wedge deeper. Now consider the irony. Harry said he wanted privacy, yet every move he and Meghan made ensured more publicity. The Oprah interview, the Netflix series, the memoir Spare. Each was framed as setting the record straight. But did they clarify, or did they complicate? Every revelation sparked new headlines, new debates, new spins. And who benefited most? The same media Harry claimed to despise. Do you see the trap? Harry's attempts to fight the machine only fed it. The more he spoke, the louder it grew. The more he revealed, the hungrier it became. And in the background, William watched, silently, as his brother dug himself deeper. To William, this wasn't freedom, it was entrapment dressed as liberation. One insider described it best. Harry stopped being Harry. He became a character in a story the media was writing for him. That story cast him as the rebel, the victim, the runaway prince. It made great headlines, great ratings, great money. But it wasn't the whole truth. And William knew it. Ask yourself, have you ever had someone else tell your story for you, in a way that felt completely wrong? Imagine that feeling, magnified by millions of headlines, repeated endlessly, stamped into public memory. That was Harry's nightmare. And it was also Meghan's weapon. Because the more the press vilified her, the more Harry clung to her. The media machine didn't just report the rift, it deepened it. And William? He played his role. He said nothing. He maintained dignity. He embodied duty. But in his silence, he carried the truth that Harry's departure wasn't about freedom or even rebellion. It was about pressure, about manipulation, about being caught in a machine that chews up individuals and spits out archetypes. But the machine wasn't just about words. It was about money. Headlines equal profit. And Harry and Meghan, willingly or unwillingly, became the hottest commodity in the royal marketplace. Every story about them sold. Every feud, every accusation, every whisper turned into gold for the tabloids. And Harry, trapped between fury and dependency, couldn't escape. And so, the contradiction grew sharper. Harry left the palace to escape the press, but in leaving, he made himself the press's most valuable subject. William saw the irony. Harry didn't. And Meghan? She understood the game better than anyone, because she'd been playing it for years. This is why William's later confirmation matters. Because once he admitted Harry never wanted to leave, It pulled the mask off the narrative. It forced us to question, was Harry the rebel prince? Or was he the manipulated pawn in someone else's story? But the press didn't just trap Harry with narratives. They trapped him with survival. Money, deals, contracts. What looked like independence was really just another cage, built not of palace rules, but of financial obligations. And when Harry realized he had walked straight into that cage, the fallout was even darker than anyone expected. Because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Financial freedom. That was the headline. That was the promise. When Harry and Meghan announced they were leaving, one of their boldest claims was that they wanted to be financially independent. No more taxpayer funding. No more being tied to the sovereign grant. They would, they said, earn their own way. On the surface, it sounded noble, empowering even. But beneath that shiny phrase lurked a reality far more complex and far more troubling. Because what they called independence may, in fact, have been a new kind of dependence. A strategic trap disguised as liberation. Think about it. Harry had never known life without royal funding. From the cradle, his housing, his security, his staff, all of it was bankrolled by the monarchy. Even when he served in the military, his royal status came with financial cushioning. Suddenly, walking away meant walking away from all of that. Security alone cost millions a year. Staff salaries, travel, housing, all gone. Without the palace, Harry and Meghan were exposed. Vulnerable. And here's the contradiction. The very moment they claimed freedom, they tied themselves to something even more constraining: Hollywood contracts. Netflix, Spotify, book deals, public speaking circuits. These weren't optional ventures. They were lifelines. To pay for their lifestyle, to maintain the kind of security detail Harry insisted his family needed, they had to sell their story. And once you start selling your story, where does it end? Ask yourself this. If your only commodity is your personal truth, how many times can you cash it in before the world demands more? Before you're forced to dig deeper, reveal more, bleed out your privacy piece by piece? That was the trap. Consider the Netflix deal. Worth millions on paper, it came with strings. The Sussexes had to deliver content that people would pay attention to. What kind of content draws eyes? Drama, revelations, conflict. And so their family life, private conversations, memories, grievances, became raw material. What once belonged to them now belonged to the world. Every episode, every interview, every anecdote turned their private pain into currency. And then there was the book, Spare, a memoir that sold millions, yes, but at what cost? Harry's relationship with his father, his relationship with William, even memories of his mother, all laid bare. Can you imagine being forced to monetize your trauma just to stay afloat? That's not freedom. That's a trap. Meanwhile, Meghan launched podcasts. They spoke on global stages. They signed with agencies. All the trappings of independence. But look closer. Each deal required exposure. Each contract demanded publicity. Each paycheck meant Harry and Meghan had to stay in the headlines. In fleeing the monarchy's spotlight, they had chained themselves to a different one. And William saw it. He saw that Harry wasn't building freedom. He was building dependency. Dependency on corporations, on contracts, on public sympathy. A man who once had the security of a 1,000-year-old institution was now at the mercy of fickle audiences and boardroom executives. William, schooled in duty, saw the irony immediately. Harry didn't. The financial trap also deepened Harry's sense of isolation. Without royal funding, he needed the deals. Without the deals, he couldn't pay for security. Without security, he couldn't protect Meghan and the children. That fear, the fear of losing safety, kept him bound to the contracts. And those contracts, in turn, kept him bound to the very publicity machine he despised. It was a vicious cycle. Let's not forget the emotional irony. Harry once described palace life as being trapped. Yet look at the cage he built for himself. In the palace, he was bound by tradition. Outside, he was bound by contracts. Inside, he felt suffocated by duty. Outside, he was suffocated by dependency. Where was the freedom in that? Ask yourself. Have you ever left one job, one relationship, one situation, thinking you'd be free, only to find yourself in something even more restrictive? That's Harry's story. He left a gilded cage and walked into one made of glass and cameras. The bars were invisible, but they were just as strong. And Meghan? She adapted quickly. She understood this world. Hollywood was her natural terrain. Deals, agents, production contracts. This was familiar. To her, financial independence meant opportunity. To Harry, it meant dislocation. He wasn't prepared for the grind, the negotiations, the endless need to stay relevant. He wasn't raised for it. William knew that. He knew his brother wasn't built for this kind of cage. And that's why, years later, when William hinted that Harry never wanted to leave, it rang with such truth. Because William wasn't just talking about royal life. He was talking about this trap too. He knew Harry never wanted to walk away from the stability, the security, the foundation of their shared world. He knew Harry had been nudged, pressured, and convinced to step into a life that looked like freedom but felt like exile. The public saw the glossy side, celebrity homes in Montecito, glamorous red carpet appearances, million-dollar contracts. But William saw the other side, the exhausted brother, the hollow eyes, the desperate need to keep the machine fed with ever more personal revelations. He saw that Harry's so-called freedom was nothing more than another cage. And the cruelest twist? Once you've cashed in your truth, what's left? What happens when the public grows tired of your story? What happens when the contracts end and you have nothing more to sell? That's the long-term trap William saw, the one he still fears for his brother. But money wasn't the only casualty. Because as the financial trap tightened, so did the collapse of trust within the family. Trust that had once been unbreakable between brothers was now in tatters. Letters, calls, meetings, all poisoned by suspicion. The collapse of trust wasn't just painful. It was catastrophic, and it would push William to carry one of the most haunting truths about Harry's so-called freedom. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Betrayal. Few words cut deeper, and few wounds last longer. For William and Harry, brothers once bound by grief and by their mother's legacy, betrayal became the poison that shattered what little trust remained between them. It wasn't just about arguments, or distance, or differing choices. This was about trust, trust that collapsed piece by piece, until the very foundation of their bond was rubble. And William's later confirmation, that Harry never truly wanted to leave, makes that collapse sting all the more. Because if Harry didn't want to go, then the betrayal he felt, and the betrayal William endured, wasn't just tragic. It was engineered. Let's start with the simplest question. What does betrayal look like inside a family like this? For most of us, betrayal might mean a broken promise, a secret revealed, a friend who didn't defend us. For the royals, betrayal was amplified 1,000 times. Every word spoken could end up in the press. Every argument could be spun into a headline. Every silence could be interpreted as abandonment. Imagine trying to trust your family in that environment. Imagine trying to trust anyone at all. For Harry, the betrayals came in two forms. First, he believed the palace itself betrayed him. Meghan was attacked by the press daily, sometimes in ways that carried sharp undertones of racism. Harry begged for stronger protection, stronger statements, louder defense. But the firm stayed silent. Never complain, never explain. To Harry, that silence was proof that his family didn't care. He saw it not as duty, but as cowardice. And every day the press ran unchecked, Meghan's resentment grew. Her anger became his. And in his eyes, the family had failed them both. But the second betrayal cut deeper. William. For Harry, William's silence stung more than anything. This was the brother who once promised their mother they would always protect each other. The brother who walked with him behind Diana's coffin. The brother who once laughed with him at polo matches, who shared secrets no one else could understand. And yet, when the storm came, William said nothing. Harry wanted a shield. William offered silence. Harry wanted fire. William offered restraint. That silence, to Harry, was unforgivable. But here's the contradiction. William believed he was being loyal. By staying silent, by refusing to throw fuel on the fire, he thought he was protecting the monarchy, and in a way, protecting Harry too. He saw Harry's fury, his volatility, his dependence on Meghan's influence, and he believed that feeding it publicly would only destroy him further. In William's mind, silence was strategy. In Harry's mind, it was betrayal. Now flip the perspective. For William, the betrayal was Harry's. Harry broke the family code, the unspoken vow to keep private matters private. By speaking out, by doing the Oprah interview, by publishing Spare, Harry betrayed not just the institution, but the brother who had trusted him with his most personal moments. William read those pages. He saw their childhood, their private fights, their intimate conversations spilled out for the world to devour. Imagine reading your life, your pain, your mistakes, broadcast not by strangers, but by your own brother. That wasn't just betrayal, it was humiliation. Trust collapsed. Phone calls grew cold. Meetings became tense. At one point, reports suggest William told Harry, "You're destroying everything." Harry, in turn, accused William of siding with the institution over his own flesh and blood. Each brother saw the other as traitor. And once that seed of betrayal is planted, it grows wild. Every word, every action becomes suspect. Insiders say there were attempts to mend fences. The Queen tried to mediate. Charles urged reconciliation. But the trust was gone. Even in moments of civility, both brothers second-guessed the other.